General Hospital spoilers teased that Port Charles had always been a city simmering with secrets, but lately, the tension felt ready to boil over. Michael Corinthos had been keeping a wary eye on his younger sister Christina for weeks, sensing that something was weighing heavily on her. He knew Christina well enough to recognize when she was hiding something, but this time, it wasn't just personal trouble. It was dangerous, tangled trouble, the kind that came with legal ramifications and the potential to destroy reputations. When the truth landed in his lap, it hit hard. Michael learned the full scope of Christina's involvement in the car accident that left Rick Lansing and Elizabeth Baldwin injured. The knowledge was damning enough, but the fallout was bigger than just that night. Rick and Ava Jerome had been connected to a scheme one Christina had stumbled into, one that could leave her completely exposed if the wrong person decided to talk. And someone already had. What made it worse was the chain reaction the accident had set in motion. Ava, ever the opportunist, had discovered leverage against Christina and had used it to keep her in line. In a rare act of desperation, Alexis, Christina's mother, had negotiated a final payment with Ava in exchange for the weapon she held. That weapon wasn't a literal one but information, proof that Christina could be implicated in something far worse than a moment of bad judgment behind the wheel. For Alexis, the deal meant breathing room. For Christina, it meant survival. But in Port Charles, peace never lasted. Dolos, a shell company used to cover the tracks of certain shady financial moves, was supposed to be their shield. Instead, it had become a flashing red beacon for anyone looking too closely. That anyone was now Marco Rios, a man with a knack for sniffing out the faintest whiff of corruption. He'd begun to suspect that Dolos was more than it appeared and had zeroed in on transactions that looked suspiciously like embezzlement. The kind of discovery that could unravel the fragile truce Alexis and Ava had built. It was that fear that sent Christina racing to Michael's office one late afternoon, her hands shaking as she pushed the door open without knocking. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Her words tumbled out in a rush. Marco knew, she said. He had proof, or something close enough to pass for it, and he was going to the authorities. Once that happened, it would only be a matter of time before her name and Alexis's name were dragged into it. Michael stood, his expression calm despite the storm he could see raging inside her. He told her not to panic, his voice firm but not unkind. He had faced situations like this before more times than he could count, and he knew the first rule was to keep control of the narrative. He promised her he'd find out exactly what Marco had and how far he'd already gone. Before she could ask more, he was gone, leaving her in the quiet of his office with only her own thoughts and fears for company. Christina sank into his chair, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios. She trusted Michael, but she also knew the risks he was taking. If he got pulled too far into this, he could become a target himself. Meanwhile, Marco was moving quickly. He met with officials from the local authorities, handing over a neatly organized file of statements and documentation. At the center of it all were the Dolos accounts, flagged by what appeared to be large, unexplained transfers. The paperwork made it look like Alexis, or someone working with her, had been diverting funds. Anna Devane, always alert to potential corruption, was intrigued. The case didn't yet have the weight of formal charges, but it had enough to warrant a closer look. And Alexis Davis, with her history of walking fine lines in the courtroom, was too experienced not to notice when someone like Anna started circling. While Anna was making her inquiries, Michael was already one step ahead. He went straight to Alexis's office, his tone respectful but urgent. He needed access to the Dolos accounts, the same ones Marco was using as the foundation for his accusations. Alexis hesitated. Giving Michael that kind of access meant trusting him implicitly, and while she did trust him, she also knew the risk of adding another name to the trail. But the look in his eyes told her that time was short. She gave a reluctant nod, allowing him to sit at her desk and log in. Michael worked quickly, his fingers moving with purpose. He wasn't just reviewing numbers, he was rebalancing them, creating a financial picture that told a completely different story. He returned a large sum of money into the account of Ace Cassadine, one of Dolos's linked entities, adding a substantial increase to make it appear as though Alexis's investment had paid off handsomely. When he finished, he leaned back and told Alexis it was done. Her pulse slowed as she scanned the updated figures, the relief washing over her as she saw what looked like a legitimate and profitable transaction. No signs of missing money, no suspicious gaps, only a smart business move that had paid off. The timing couldn't have been more critical, because just as Alexis was catching her breath, Anna Devane walked in. Her expression was neutral but alert as she explained that there were concerns about the Dolos accounts and that she needed to ask a few questions. Michael remained seated, playing the part of an uninterested visitor. When Anna asked why he was there, he offered an easy explanation: he was meeting with Diane about a personal matter. The simplicity of the answer made it believable, and Anna's attention shifted back to Alexis. Alexis, now steady, told Anna she was happy to show her the accounts. She clicked through to the updated records, pointing out the recent deposit and the resulting gain. Anna's sharp eyes scanned the data, her mind working quickly. Everything appeared clean. The inconsistencies Marco had suggested were nowhere to be found. After a few more questions, Anna leaned back and offered a brief apology for the interruption. She had to follow leads where they went, she said, and this one had clearly been a dead end. With a polite goodbye, she left as quickly as she had arrived. The office door had barely closed before Alexis turned to Michael, her voice low but full of gratitude. He had not only saved her from immediate scrutiny but had also shielded Christina from the kind of legal and public backlash that could have ruined her life. She knew how close they had come to disaster, and she knew it wasn't over. Marco might not have proof now, but men like him rarely gave up after one failed attempt. Michael only nodded, already thinking ahead to the next move. Port Charles was a city of long memories and dangerous grudges. If Marco had already started this game, he was bound to try again. And when he did, Michael intended to be ready. Michael left Alexis' office that afternoon with a calm expression, but the storm in his mind was far from quiet. He had managed to close the immediate wound, stitching it up with a precise transfer and a clever cover story, but he knew better than to assume the danger had passed. Marco Rios was not the type to simply drop something because the numbers suddenly looked good. People like him smelled opportunity like sharks smelled blood, and if Marco had already started circling, it was only a matter of time before he found another weakness to exploit. At the same time, Michael couldn't shake the nagging thought that Christina wasn't telling him everything. She had come to him in a panic, but panic alone didn't explain the way her voice faltered when she mentioned Marco. It was as if she was keeping another piece of the puzzle hidden, afraid that if she revealed it, even Michael wouldn't be able to save her. And that worried him, because secrets left unspoken had a habit of detonating at the worst possible moment. Christina, meanwhile, was pacing in her apartment, unable to settle. She replayed the meeting with Michael over and over, wishing she had told him the whole truth but terrified of the consequences if she did. Marco's discovery about the embezzlement was bad enough, but if anyone dug deeper and linked it directly to Dolos, the fallout wouldn't stop at her. It would tear through Alexis' reputation, and given Ava Jerome's involvement, it could open doors to all sorts of retaliations they weren't prepared to handle. Ava herself was playing a different game. She had agreed to Alexis' final payment arrangement in exchange for the weapon against Christina being retired, but Ava didn't live by the same rules as the rest of them. In her mind, agreements were fluid things, subject to change when leverage shifted. And Ava had noticed that with Michael stepping in, the balance of power was moving again. The fact that he had managed to make the Dolos accounts look pristine almost overnight meant one of two things: either he was better at this than she had given him credit for, or he had allies she hadn't accounted for. Both possibilities intrigued her. Meanwhile, Marco was preparing his next move. After his initial visit to the authorities, he'd expected immediate action, questions, subpoenas, something. Instead, the response had been maddeningly slow, which only made him more suspicious. Someone, somewhere, was pulling strings to keep things quiet. If Marco had any doubts before about the depth of this conspiracy, they were gone now. The more someone tried to bury the trail, the more determined he became to follow it. Anna Devane, on the other hand, found herself caught between two instincts. Her professional side told her that something about the Dolos situation didn't quite add up. Yes, the accounts looked clean now, but they had been flagged for a reason. And Michael Corinthos being in Alexis' office at just the right moment was a coincidence she didn't entirely believe in. Still, after reviewing the files, she had no grounds to push further. On paper, Alexis had simply made a wise investment and come out ahead. The only thing Anna could do was keep an eye on the players involved, especially Michael, whose history of navigating both legitimate and less than legitimate dealings was no secret. Michael, anticipating exactly that, made sure his next moves were quieter. He began contacting his own network, people who could keep tabs on Marco's activities without drawing attention. If Marco was going to keep digging, Michael wanted to know exactly where and when before he made his next strike. The key to winning this game wasn't to block every move, it was to anticipate them, redirect them, and make the opponent believe they had made the decision themselves. Christina finally called Michael again late one evening, her voice tight with strain. "It's not just Marco," she admitted reluctantly. "There's someone else, someone who knows more than they should." She wouldn't name them, not yet, but Michael could hear the fear under her words. This was bigger than she had first made it seem. And if that was the case, then his job wasn't just to clean up the past, it was to build a shield around the future. In the coming days, Anna's quiet watchfulness, Marco's relentless suspicion, Ava's calculated curiosity, and Christina's growing desperation would begin to converge. The truth about Dolos and the embezzlement scheme had been papered over for now, but it was still there, waiting for the right or wrong moment to rip free. And when it did, the fallout wouldn't be contained to a single scandal. It would ripple through every connection, every alliance, and every secret in their tangled web, pulling friend and foe alike into the undertow. Michael knew that moment was coming. The only question was whether he could position himself and those he cared about on the right side of the wave when it hit. And in Port Charles, that was never a guarantee. The tension in Port Charles had reached a quiet but dangerous hum, like the air before a summer storm. Everyone involved in the Dolos mess was playing their own angle now, but the real threat was how those angles were starting to intersect. Michael had been in this position before too many times, and he knew that the longer all these pieces moved on the board, the harder it would be to keep them from crashing into one another. Christina's fear had shifted into a gnawing paranoia. She started noticing the same car parked across from her building more than once, and an unfamiliar number had begun calling her phone without leaving messages. She hadn't told Alexis about it yet, worried her mother would overreact and make the wrong move. But every time she saw Alexis sitting in her office, pretending to work while glancing toward the door, Christina wondered if Alexis was just as worried as she was. Alexis, for her part, was trying to convince herself the worst was over. The accounts were clean, Anna had walked away, and the final payment to Ava had been made. But she also knew that Ava never truly let go of leverage. If Ava saw a way to twist this situation into something more profitable, she would do it without hesitation. Alexis told herself she was prepared for that possibility, but the truth was, she wasn't. Not if it came at the cost of her daughters. Ava, ever the strategist, had already started to lay new traps. She reached out to Marco under the guise of sharing concerns, dangling just enough information to suggest that there was more to the Dolos story than anyone had admitted. Ava didn't reveal the cleaned-up accounts, no, that would have been too generous, but she hinted that sudden changes in financial records were often a sign of cover-ups. And with that, she planted the seed in Marco's mind that the real story was still out there, waiting to be uncovered. Marco took the bait. Within days, he was making discreet inquiries into Michael's own business dealings, convinced that the Corinthos name meant there was dirt to find. What he didn't realize was that Michael was already watching him, feeding him just enough misleading information to keep him chasing shadows. Anna, who had promised herself she'd moved on from the Dolos situation, found it impossible to ignore the undercurrent of activity. Too many people were suddenly talking to each other who normally wouldn't. Too many phone calls were happening behind closed doors. Anna told herself she would only check in one more time, just to be sure. But she knew that in this town, just one more time was rarely the end. Michael could feel the endgame approaching. He arranged a private meeting with Christina at the Metro Court, deliberately choosing a public place where no one could easily make a move. Over coffee, he told her the truth: if we can't control the narrative, we have to bury it so deep no one can dig it up again. That means all of us on the same page, you, me, Alexis, and even Ava. Christina flinched at the last name, but Michael's tone left no room for argument. The uneasy alliance that followed was built on necessity, not trust. Ava agreed to stop feeding Marco information in exchange for a future favor from Michael, a favor she didn't define, which was exactly what worried him. Alexis agreed to give Michael full access to any account or record that could be tied to Dolos. And Christina, reluctantly, revealed the last piece she'd been hiding, the other person who knew about the embezzlement. It wasn't a stranger. It was someone who had been in the room when it happened. Someone who could connect every dot if they chose to. And they were already talking to Marco. That revelation changed everything. The plan shifted from defense to offense. Michael began working around the clock, not just to stop the leak, but to turn it back on their enemies. If they could discredit Marco before he made his move, the whole case would collapse in on itself. The danger, of course, was that in playing so aggressively, they risked exposing themselves even more. By the end of the week, the lines were drawn. Marco was closing in, Anna was circling again, Ava was holding her cards close, Alexis was bracing for impact, and Christina was living in constant dread. And Michael, calm, calculating Michael, was ready to make the first strike. He didn't know yet if it would save them or destroy them all, but in Port Charles, the difference between victory and disaster often came down to who moved first. The storm was about to break. And when it did, no one would come out untouched.